The Rimac Nevera is perhaps the most significant supercar in a generation, probably longer. It simultaneously redefines what an EV can do and what a supercar can do, and somehow it does this in a joyful, emotive, and strangely enough, distinctly petrol-headed way. If this car is a glimpse of the future of car enthusiasm, then sign me up because this thing is proper. Rule number one of automotive journalism is to be objective, but honestly that's impossible. Collectively, we share too many thrilling, manually shifted, gasoline-fueled experiences, the kind we carry with us for the rest of our lives, to give the Nevera a fair chance on its own merits. That's too bad, but it's a battle this car has faced its whole life, and it will continue to do so for years to come. And I'm right there with the most rabid traditionalists. I will choose a 1973 Porsche Carrera RS over a new GT3, and I will choose a manual GT3 over any two-pedal hybrid supercar. But the Nevera works to dismantle these biases in a systematic and ultimately brilliant way, and it has the chops to do so for anyone who is open-minded enough to let it. One of the most important things to understand about the Rimac story is that its founder, Mate Rimac, grew up with a Carrera GT poster on his wall. It tells you where this company's North Star is, and it tells you a lot about the underlying philosophy of the Nevera. This is a driver's car through and through. Like many young car enthusiasts, Mate had a BMW E30, which he raced in his native Croatia. He was also interested in engineering, having won an electronics competition in high school for a new computer UX concept that replaced keyboard and mouse with sensors embedded in gloves. When one of his friends blew up the E30's engine in 2008, Mate decided to replace it with an electric powertrain from a forklift, creating something which his fellow racers derided as a glorified washing machine.
Od toga garaže sve počelo prije jedno 2,5-3 godine. Tu sam ja počeo šarafiti u tom autu sam. Tu sam napravio prvu verziju tog auta. Znači drugi put je već bio naš motor, treći put bolji naš motor od ovog prvog i tako dalje. Tako da smo sad došli do te razine da je sve unutra stvarno naš vlastiti razvoj.
But over the course of 6 or 7 iterations, the car's performance silenced its critics. By 2011, it held FIA and Guinness records for the world's fastest accelerating electric car, eclipsing the Tesla Roadster by nearly a second to 60 miles per hour. The obscene capabilities of the electric E30 led to Rimac starting VST Conversions, a company that engineered and produced EV conversion components so that other enthusiasts could experience the brilliant performance of an EV. This work eventually highlighted the inherent engineering compromises of converting gasoline-powered cars, so Rimac was soon dreaming of building a bespoke ground-up EV performance car. At university in 2010, when Mate was 22, he met Adriano Mudri, who remains the Rimac's director of design to this day. Together, they conceptualized, designed, and obsessed over a clean-sheet, all-electric supercar, although they had no idea how they would build such a thing. This was a particularly tall order because Mate strongly felt that the work should occur in his home country, and Croatia had basically no pre-existing automotive engineering infrastructure or workforce. In fact, Daimler's revenue was almost twice the GDP of the whole country of Croatia. But eventually, by taking on EV powertrain engineering prototype projects for car manufacturers to provide cash flow, Rimac's small team was able to develop what would become their first car. Initially born out of necessity, this two-sided approach continues to this day in the form of Rimac Automobili, which makes Rimac branded supercars, and Rimac Technology, which has made EV solutions for more than a dozen car manufacturers, including Porsche, Hyundai Kia, Jaguar Land Rover, Aston Martin, Cupra, Renault, and Pininfarina. In September of 2011, at the Frankfurt Motor Show, Rimac debuted the supercar that had always been the dream, the Concept One. Built in just 5 months by a 10-employee company whose cash flow was so tight that every month felt like it could be the last, the car was impossibly bold. Designed in-house, it had 4 motors making 1,200 horsepower and would do 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds, the same as a Bugatti Veyron Supersport. In 2011, this was outlandish stuff, and putting the car in production seemed equally far-fetched. The show car was effectively a hand-built concept with many basic functionality and manufacturing questions still unanswered. But Rimac had pointed the bat, and the next few years saw a remarkable string of successes. In 2014, the company raised an A-series round of financing, allowing it to grow from 20 to 60 people, and work continued on both putting the Concept One in production as well as more work for OEMs, including one which Mate was particularly proud of. Christian von Koenigsegg is one of Mate's heroes, and so the 2014 public announcement that Rimac had developed the hybrid portion of the Regera's sophisticated powertrain was another pinch-me moment for the 5-year-old company. By 2016, the first Concept One was finally ready for delivery to a customer, making it the first ever all-electric production hypercar. Although just 8 were built, plus 2 more track-oriented examples, Mate's dream was finally in some sense realized. But the lessons learned from the Concept One, not to mention all of the ongoing technology work for global OEMs, meant that Rimac already had their eye on the next target. This was the C2, which we now know as the Nevera, and it appeared in concept form at the 2018 Geneva Motor Show. It would be produced in larger numbers, 150 examples, and was conceived to push the boundaries of the automobile, regardless of its propulsion, even further. To do this, it gained nearly 700 horsepower over the Concept One, for a total of 1,888 horsepower, and not a single component was carried over. At the same time, it needed to be civil enough to drive every day and safe enough to homologate for the global market. Rimac Automobili would need to become a world-class car manufacturer, and the approach they took to this was every bit as ambitious as everything else they had ever done throughout their history. Developing the Nevera for production took 4.5 years, relatively quick for a clean-sheet production car, but positively lightning fast when you consider how far this car pushes the limits of both technology and the company. At the end of 2018, Rimac had 450 employees, but by the time production of the Nevera started, there were 1,900. They weren't just building a new car, they were building a new company. 18 Nevera prototypes were built, of which a dozen were crashed, each one more than once. Several new factories were built to accommodate this growth, so much so that the Nevera will have been built in 4 different facilities by the time that all is said and done. Also in 2018, Porsche made a substantial cash investment in Rimac, but eventually decided that rather than continuing to develop EV technology in-house, they would just merge Bugatti and Rimac, creating a new company, Bugatti Rimac, and putting Mate in charge of it.
Of a new company, the best hypercar company in the world, called Bugatti Rimac.
So what did the Volkswagen Group, the biggest car maker in the world, see that made them hand over the keys to Bugatti, and not just a Bugatti, but the whole damn company, to a guy who was 15 years old when the Veyron came out? Well, let's examine the car that bears the Rimac name to figure that out. One of the most noteworthy things about the Nevera is the amount of supplier involvement, almost none. This was done in large part out of necessity. Suppliers are expensive and slow-moving. Case in point, the combination start button and gear selector is designed and produced to a world-class standard in-house. And just wait till you get to the core mechanical components of the Nevera. The stiffness of the entirely carbon structure increases by almost 40% when the battery pack is installed, and the result is the stiffest production car chassis ever made, on par with a Le Mans prototype. The magic of a stiff structure is that it eliminates unwanted suspension geometry changes from chassis flex, which means more precise control and the ability to fit a softer suspension since there's no wheel motion resulting from the chassis as it deflects. The battery pack is mounted not beneath the floor, but between and behind the passengers so they can sit as low as possible and to keep the mass centered in the car. Installed in this chassis is the part of the Nevera that allows it to do what no other car can, the powertrain. Yes, it has 4 motors supplying 1,888 horsepower and 1,741 foot-pounds of torque, And yes, that allows it to do 0 to 60 in 1.85 seconds, 0 to 100 in 3.6 seconds, an 8.6 second quarter mile, and 256 miles per hour, but those figures are nothing compared to the combination of traction control and torque vectoring. The output of an electric motor can be adjusted 100 times per second, and each motor can be individually controlled to provide acceleration or deceleration via regenerative braking, while different driving modes adjust power distribution and quantity, aerodynamics, suspension parameters, and the sensitivity of accelerator and steering. As sophisticated as modern technology is in gasoline cars, there is still only one source of power, which imposes limits on how power can be distributed to each wheel. Not so here. The result is nothing short of shocking, and best of all, this technology was deployed with the goal of making a sensational driver's car, not just something that's fast but dull. The Nevera's development team used a simple question as a touchstone when making decisions about the car's dynamics. Would this impress a Formula One world champion? Evidently, it did, because in summer of 2022, the 2016 F1 champion Nico Rosberg took delivery of the first customer Nevera.
Proper, amazing. Whoa! And it's so fast as well. It's proper sick.
He is immensely competent, but what is this car like in the hands of a schmuck like me? My first impression of this car is that it feels natural and right. For a car with such obscene technology and capability, it feels strangely familiar, like a big Lotus Elise, but higher quality and with a much better powertrain. Its responses are incredibly well judged for the driving enthusiast, never feeling like there are computers intermediating your requests. It responds exactly the way you hope it will. Then there's the performance. It is simultaneously face-meltingly stupendous, yet also accessible. It is the friendliest 1900 horsepower car you could imagine, the result of the supernatural traction control which reads the road surface so perfectly that you can floor it when the wheels on one side of the car are on wet pavement and the wheels on the other side of the car are on dry pavement, and accelerate clear to 150 miles per hour without touching the steering wheel. At the same time, however, the pace it can achieve is so otherworldly that 300 kilometers an hour on a swift backroad is entirely normal according to the factory development drivers. And it's this pace that demands the driver be fully engaged. The delta between cornering speeds and straight line speeds means that it's necessary to plan braking almost as if one were on a racetrack, while the lack of reference points of RPM and gear choice is initially disorienting for entering corners at the right speeds. That's not to say this car is dull at low speeds, and in fact, unlike a gasoline engine whose redline and shift points tell you exactly how much performance you've left on the table, there's no real difference in experience, aside from the forces, when you're using 90% of the power versus 50% of the power in this car. No matter the speed, the ride quality and body control are superb, and the car always feels lithe, agile, and eager to change direction. It weighs 5,000 pounds, but feels at least 2,000 pounds lighter, again because of the brilliant traction control and torque vectoring. The steering is among the most feelsome of any electrically assisted system, and the entire car possesses a depth and playfulness that is genuinely entertaining. In addition to the feedback from the steering and the adjustability of the car's personality from the various drive modes, you hear and feel things in this car. Pebbles hitting the monocoque, perhaps a clunk from the suspension or chassis, fluids pumping around the car, the sound of the motors, none of which is synthetic other than the mandated low-speed pedestrian warning, and the occasional chuntering from the driveline. The result is a car that is the opposite of insular. It has genuine texture and will probably seem downright raw in a decade or two. At the same time, it's a perfectly civilized GT car, the kind that the occupants could comfortably spend all day in. And it's this remarkable duality of the Nevera that is its most impressive party trick. A car with this power should be vicious, yet it is not. The car makes hard things look easy, and it can dramatically change its personality thanks to its technical sophistication. This is true even aerodynamically, with a 326% increase in downforce between low drag and high downforce modes. The place that the Nevera lands in terms of compromises reminds me, strangely, of the McLaren F1. Both cars use their awe-inspiring technical cleverness to produce an experience that will satisfy, entertain, and maybe even slightly scare the most discerning driver, while also providing a remarkably practical and usable car that's genuinely great at the GT mission. That said, the Nevera is not a substitute for the F1 or any other truly great gasoline-powered driver's car. It is, however, a complement. It does things that gasoline cars simply cannot, in much the same way that those cars do things that the Nevera cannot. Fortunately, the person buying the Nevera will not have to choose. They can buy both. And what they will get is an entirely new set of experiences in this car, a level of performance, brilliance, and engineering which we have never seen before, all presented with full-blooded car nut gusto.